We're talking to occupational therapist Joy Anderson today. Hi, Joy. How are you?
Hi there, Joy. I'm good, thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Joy, today we're talking about sensory processing disorders. What are sensory processing disorders?
Okay, basically, sensory processing is something that we all do. It's how we make sense of the world. So it's the way our body interacts with the environment, takes visual information, auditory information, tactile information, so the things that we're feeling, and then also from our internal systems, so the vestibular proprioceptive system, which is about knowing where our body is in space, taking all that information, compiling it in the brain, and then using it to make sense of our world. So that's sensory processing and something we all do, and something that's done on a continuum. We all have kind of strengths and weaknesses within that. But sensory processing disorder is when that processing isn't happening as effectively as it should do, which is then affecting the person's ability to function and engage in day-to-day life and lots of activities of daily living. So sensory processing isn't directly observable. So when we're looking at whether a person has sensory processing disorder, we would look at the observable behaviours that we can see and kind of cluster those behaviours together and then attribute it to the different sensory systems and hypothesize that those behaviours then link to different sensory systems, which can then be addressed within the intervention period. So the types of behaviours we might be looking at are either over-responding or under-responding to stimuli. So it might be that a sound which seems kind of fairly innocuous to anybody else, and there's a real big over-response to it, like a Hoover or a hairdryer, those kind of things, or they're just kind of child isn't registering auditory input. Again, it could be within the visual system, that too much information is taken in, so the child really over-responds to a stimulus that everybody else kind of just processes naturally. Children can experience difficulties with paying attention and their concentration. They can be very distracted. Again, it can impact upon their gross and fine motor skills. So they might be very clumsy, uncoordinated, their handwriting may be poor, their kind of self-care skills in dressing might be impaired, their sequencing, all those kind of behaviours. We will be looking at those behaviours and kind of clustering them together to indicate which sensory systems were maybe not processing information as they should, and then that would be reflected in the intervention. And certainly your sensory processing is paramount to everyday functioning because it underlies all our higher level skills. So all the skills that we expect a child to do, that kind of cognitive skills, all the education, social interaction, all those higher level skills are kind of have the foundations of sensory processing. So it's so important to have those kind of solid foundations in terms of sensory development, because otherwise those higher level skills, when the child comes to kind of have those increased challenges, it becomes a lot more difficult, and the child really sort of struggles. The children maybe have to rely on splinter skills, so things that they learn to do one thing but they can't generalise those skills, and it has a huge impact on self-esteem, on their sort of levels of satisfaction, because everything is a lot more difficult. Everything has to become a lot more of a conscious thought rather than things becoming automatic, and ultimately things to achieve success is a lot more difficult. So that's the kind of the impact of sensory processing disorder, which would be an umbrella term, I guess, and then within that you have 3 different areas in terms of the way the sensory processing isn't taking place effectively. So as an occupational therapist, we would be looking at those 3 different categories, and how the systems aren't working efficiently, to then go forward with the intervention. And just to be clear, it's not that there's a problem with, say, the visual system in terms of the eyes working. It's the way the message gets sent from the eyes to the brain to then be made sense of. That's where the difficulties lie, and that's what we'll be working on within the intervention period.
So if we took that one specific example you've just used about the eyes, what intervention would you use there if that was the case?
Okay, well, generally the difficulties wouldn't occur within just one sensory system. So we would be looking at the visual system, the auditory system, tactile, vestibular and proprioception. So we would be looking at the kind of visual perceptual skills, and basically what the brain does is it takes all of that information from all of those different sources and combines it all together and then makes sense of it and helps us to produce appropriate responses to that environmental demand, whatever that might be. So within the therapy setting, we'd be kind of looking at getting all those different sensory systems to get enough information through, just the right amount, not too much information, not too little information, to then be able to process that effectively. So within interventions generally, we would be looking at firstly compensatory strategies, so supporting the person to get through the day, so maybe looking at equipment that was relevant, or putting in something called a sensory diet, which is specific sensory activities that are put in throughout the day in response to challenges throughout the day, and as a kind of preempting stressful situations to help the child to manage the day-to-day life, which will obviously improve that kind of function and that engagement, but then also looking at remediating the difficulties as well, which would involve sensory integration therapy, which is the kind of the intervention approach we would use for sensory processing disorder. Sensory integration therapy is looking about improving the efficiency of sensory processing, and changing the way the brain processes the information, the pathways that go between the kind of the body and the brain to send that information. It's like a muscle. The more those synapses are used, the more efficient they become. So actually, by using kind of intensive input and integrating information from the different sensory systems, we can then improve that efficiency of the way the brain is processing that, which allows them to engage more and having improved functioning within day-to-day life.
If my toddler doesn't like it when his or her hands get messy, is this a problem?
I think we're all kind of on a continuum of sensory processing. I think it would be a problem when it's impacting on the child's ability to engage in day-to-day life. So actually, are you having to avoid certain situations because of that child's kind of tactile defensiveness, or is it something that it's just, it's a one-off, it doesn't really impact upon their life? And I think that's kind of something when we're working with the parents to understand how much that difficulty is affecting the child's life. But certainly we work with a lot of children who have that real tactile defensiveness, so certain sensations are kind of too much information is sent to the brain about that information, about that touch, so it's then perceived as painful to them. So certainly we would look at different approaches of trying to regulate that and dampen it down, so that the child's able to cope with those experiences without the anxiety, without the distress, because obviously that's going to impact on, being very distracted, high anxiety, avoiding activities, which is going to then impact on your occupational balance. So certainly the degree to which it's affecting your life is key, but certainly that can be a big issue that would warrant occupational therapy input.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Pleasure, thank you.